The Baltimore Ravens announced their final 53-man roster. Finally, we talk about who's on the roster, who got cut, which names could be coming in, and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens Live, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here tonight. It is Tuesday night, right about 8:45 p.m., making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day, of the night, whenever, however you are watching or listening. Thank you for tuning in. We're free and available for you all podcasting platforms. That includes video form on YouTube, audio form wherever you get your shows here. And we bring you that 5-day-a-week Ravens content Monday through Friday. We do bonus episodes after every single Ravens game, after every single piece of Ravens big news. If you have a friend or a family member who likes Ravens coverage, we also have them covered as well. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Finally, the Ravens announced their 53-man roster. It took them the better part of 4 hours to do so. I think 8:22, if I'm not mistaken, was the actual time they put out their tweet. They were one of the last teams to put out their final 53-man roster, and we were just in the dark. We didn't know who was getting cut, who was staying. But now we know. We know who stays. We know who goes. We're going to break it all down. And there were some surprise cuts. There were some guys who stayed that I didn't think were going to stay, as is usual. I don't think it's very rare to get the final 53-man roster 100% correct, but we're going to dive into it here. We're going to instantly react. I really haven't had that much of an opportunity to dive in and look at it. So it's almost like literally my instant reaction to this. I know the generalness of who made it, but we will dive into it here. And if you have thoughts in the chat, Chris here putting the purple heart, appreciate you. Ravens 76 B more checking in. Jeff Schultz, yes, Dayton Wade. We're gonna talk about him. And look at that, Quantum. What's up, Quantum? Got the notifications. So if you want to tune in for the lives, be sure to turn those notifications on. Appreciate you for tuning in here, Quantum. But let's get into it. Let's just go position by position for the roster, very generally, and then we'll break it down in this first part of the show. 2 quarterbacks for the Ravens, Lamar Jackson and Josh Johnson. That means Devin Leary did not make the team. I had projected that and expected that, but officially Devin Leary not on the team. Running backs, they included Patrick Ricard in this conversation, so technically it's 4, but it's really 3 running backs and 1 fullback. But the running backs, Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, and Rashid Ali actually did make the roster. I did not have him on the roster. I had him on injured reserve. So either the Ravens feel confident enough in him being their number 3. They saw enough. Personally, I did not, but they either saw enough or they're going to put him on IR after the fact here, and they will bring in another veteran, which we'll talk about some of those veteran names in the final part of the show. 6 wide receivers. That, of course, is the sweet spot. Of course, I strayed away from everything I've been preaching on this show for like 4 years now out of my 5, and they go with what I preach. So 6 wide receivers, Deontay Hardy, Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace, Tez Walker. So Dayton Wade, obviously the odd man out there. I had them keeping 7 with Dayton Wade on the roster. They did not. Tight ends, 3, no surprises. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. Nothing doing there. Offensive line, they kept 10. It was the 9 I had projected, and then Josh Jones also made it. So Nick Samek, Tyler Linderbaum, Patrick McCary, Ben Cleveland, Roger Rosengarten, Salah, Andrew Voorhees, Josh Jones, Daniel Farley, Ronnie Stanley. Defensive line, you got 5 of those guys. Brent Urban did make the roster, so Michael Pierce, Justin Madubuike, brought to Washington, Brent Urban, Travis Jones. Linebackers, this is both inside and outside. Roquan Smith, Trenton Simpson, Malik Harrison, Chris Board, Bisa Isaac, Kyle Van Noy, David Ajabu, Tavius Robinson, Adafe Owe. So Joe Evans did not make the roster. Josh Ross did not make the roster. Chris Board did. Defensive backs, this is corner and safety. Nate Wiggins, Jalen Rumor Davis, Bo Braid, Kyle Hamilton, Brandon Stevens, TJ Tampa, Sanusi Cannon, Darius Washington, Marcus Williams, Eddie Jackson, Marlon Humphrey. So bump Cooper off the roster. Bo Braid on the roster. Very good for Bo Braid. Pepe Williams, we know, obviously wasn't on the roster last night. Specialists, no surprise here. Justin Tucker, Jordan Stout, Nick Moore. Injured list, the Ravens used one of their 2 designated spots on Arthur Millette, and they had Keaton Mitchell, who they placed on the PUP list. And I'm going to try to quickly find the let me quickly find the actual injured reserve, because there were a few other players who they are essentially going to stash on injured reserve this year. That is Deion Jennings, Christian Matthew, Trayvon Mullen, Isaiah Washington, and Owen Wright. So all those players I just mentioned are done for the season, including Owen Wright, who I had kind of talked about in that vein. So initial reactions from me. I would have put Dayton Wade on the roster. He didn't make it. I personally would have kept him over Josh Jones. I understand the Ravens want a vet. And again, this is not the final Ravens roster. There are going to be some maneuvers. Apparently the Ravens are going to be aggressive trying to get some veterans in or whatnot. So we'll see how that goes. But to me, there are some guys that I don't think will pass through waivers. I know the Ravens apparently waited and did all this. Apparently what they're doing is they're trying to make the percentages go up that their guys will not be claimed on waivers. By waiting, teams will have plans in place and not factor in Ravens guys. I don't necessarily buy that, but apparently that's what's going on. Dayton Wade, I don't expect to pass through waivers. I think that, that's tough. Bub Cooper, I don't expect to pass through waivers. Joe Evans, I don't expect to pass through waivers. So those are 3 guys where, Josh Jones on the roster, maybe you could have done a handshake deal with Chris Board or Brent Urban for that. It's tough where, you kind of have to maneuver around those guys, but I would have personally kept Dayton Wade on the roster. And yes, Joe Radke asking the real questions. Did Lamar Jackson make it? Yes, he did. Don't you worry, Joe. It was close, apparently, but Lamar is on the roster. But I think everybody's most excited about Beau Braid. I see Kieran in the chat here. River Hill, man, Maryland product through and through, local kid. You got to feel great for him. You have to feel incredible. Did everything and more to make this roster. Baltimore going very heavy in their secondary as I expected them to. But Beau Braid is somebody that just embodies what the Ravens want at safety. He embodies what their MO is, what their mantra is. They love physical safeties. They love guys that have versatility. Beau Braid has that. And in that Packers game, all over the field. He was all over the field. So I'm ecstatic for Beau Braid, right? And I see, again, we have Yolanda, Ravens Talk with Yolanda in here. Very happy for Braid. 100%. I think out of all of these players, you feel the most excitement and just happiness for Beau Braid. So to me, this is a guy that if they hadn't kept him, I would have kind of been like, why? I understand going 6 safeties is a lot of safeties. Usually they only keep 4, max 5. But Beau Braid forced their hand, and this is what some of these young guys do, right? They force their team's hand to say, I'm going to be a good player in this league, and if you want to keep me, or you can't cut me, or else a team's going to claim me, I'm going to go somewhere else. So Beau Braid did that. Beau Braid 1,000% went automated through waivers, and even if he is a depth guy, special teams piece, I don't expect him to play a ton on the defensive side of the ball this season, not offensive. Don't expect him to play a ton on defense, but he's a guy you need to have around. Him and Sanusi Kane both, I thought I was a little bit iffy on Sanusi Kane going into the preseason, going into training camp. Was he going to be able to prove enough as their 7th rounder? He did that and more. So super happy for Beau Braid, super happy for Sanusi Kane as well. Pulling back up the roster graphic quickly. I lost it here for a second. Little shocked Rasheen Ali made it. Little shocked. I don't know if this is Eric DeCosta just trying to, really with his 5th round pick history, trying to right that ship. If I had to guess what ends up happening with just their safety position in general, plus running back with those 2, I expected kind of a flip-flop with those 2, where usually you see teams keep 4 running backs and, 4 safeties, not have a lot of guys at safety, but more running backs. But the Ravens being a run-first team, I saw some people saying, they're going to keep 4 running backs, and they're going to do this, and they're going to make room. With Owen Wright going down, with Chris Collier and John Kelly being the other options, with the running back room, I mean, I don't feel like Rasheen Ali is going to be on the roster long term. I think this is an IR thing for him, or maybe it's early season, but I think they would be much better served bringing in a veteran. And there are options. We'll talk about them. Samaje Perine or Bam Knight, some of those guys that could help the Ravens out before Keaton Mitchell comes back, who obviously was on the PUP list. And exactly right here, Co-Air saying Frank Gore Jr. could be an option. Frank Gore Jr. had a phenomenal season, but was just a numbers game for Buffalo. And that's what it is. The Ravens are a team that takes advantage of that more often than not. Is other teams, much like the Ravens, are forced into a numbers game. This is not just a Ravens issue, but teams are forced into a numbers game. They have to cut somebody, and then that's what ends up happening. I think that Perine is a better option than Frank Gore Jr. right now, even though, look, Frank Gore Jr. will be electric. I've been a huge fan of his game, and I was kind of circling him for if Buffalo ended up getting rid of him. I was like, ooh, what about Frank Gore Jr., right? That would be good. But I think Perine brings third down ability. He brings special teams ability, another player, and this is kind of going into our third segment a little bit. We'll revisit this conversation. But Hassan Haskins out of Tennessee, well, he was out of Michigan, drafted by Tennessee, former Michigan player. I think that Hassan Haskins could be a possible third running back option, who Brian Callahan, the new head coach, described as a special teams demon. Which team do we know that likes special teams demons? Which team do we know? We talk about them here every single day, and that is the Baltimore Ravens. So there are options for them. But coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to be diving more into the other surprises that happened. We'll talk about Deontay Hardy's place on the roster instead of Dayton Wade. Talk about some more on the offensive line side of the ball, linebackers, just a lot more conversation here coming up on this live edition of Locked On Ravens. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Still plenty to dive into. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. I love going on FanDuel, looking at all the options they have to offer. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon down a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. So for the Ravens and Chiefs, that game, man, it is coming up quickly, almost 1 week till Ravens Chiefs. 2.5-point underdogs. The Ravens open up over at FanDuel. So if you like that line, be sure to go visit FanDuel and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and download America's #1 sportsbook. We are back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens Live on Tuesday night. The Ravens taken forever to release that final roster, but we finally have it. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Again, Taco Tuesday evening, Taco Tuesday night. I appreciate everybody giving me some time tonight and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day each and every day. Again, 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens. So we have Ravens content for you Monday through Friday, our regular 6 a.m. episodes. We have bonus content like these live shows after every game, every piece of Ravens big news. A new thing we're doing this year is Sunday mornings before games. Sunday game day episodes, those will come out as well. So if you're an everyday, I really appreciate you tuning in and supporting me every day on this show. If you are new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you'll stay a while. You're enjoying the content. You can subscribe and hit the like button on YouTube, follow along in audio form. If you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back in to the show as well. Ravens announced a 53-man roster, some surprising cuts along the way as well. I really convinced myself that Dayton Wade was making the roster. I don't know what it was. And if you've been an everydayer, you know that I am very against 7 wide receivers, especially for the Ravens. I am very against 7 wide receivers. But I said, well, Dayton's a guy that showed a lot of promise. It's probably not going to pass through waivers. There is a chance he does. Again, if we remember a couple years ago, where Darius Washington for the Ravens, he got cut. And everyone was like, okay, I was on here saying there's no way he makes the roster. Nothing, he's gone, and he passed through, and it was a miracle. And now he's going to play a big role for the Ravens, especially while Arthur Millette is down for at least the first 4 weeks of the regular season, now that he's on injured reserve designated to return. I would have put Dayton Wade on the roster. Now sparks the conversation about Deontay Hardy, because I think we can all be in agreement, right? We can all be in agreement that Tylan Wallace earned his spot. Tylan Wallace most definitely earned his spot. Made a lot of plays during the preseason, scored touchdowns, big timely receptions, and training camp he made plays. This is not about Tylan Wallace. Essentially, the conversation started as there were 5 locks at wide receiver, and then it was a battle for the 6th between Tylan Wallace and Dayton Wade and Malik Cunningham and all those guys. But it evolved into Deontay Hardy hasn't practiced. He hasn't really shown a bunch on special teams anyway. Are you going to keep him as your returner? Do the return rules, the new specialist thing, does that end up smashing what Dayton Wade has done? Does that end up just, overriding it and overruling it? The answer was yes, obviously, as we know. I think Deontay Hardy as a returner is a really solid option for the Ravens to have, but I think we can better assess once this roster ends up being actually finalized. And by that, I mean, obviously the Ravens bringing in other guys, potentially IR maneuvers, handshake deal maneuvers, whatever that might be. But if Dayton Wade goes, I'm sure there's going to be some level of a, okay, and then if Deontay Hardy doesn't really make an impact this season, which I do expect him to, but it's a return value with new special teams rules, which I do think is valuable. I do think that aspect of the game is valuable. But is Dayton Wade going to be the one that got away if he ends up not making the practice squad? If you can get Dayton Wade on the practice squad, it's no harm, no foul. If you can get Dayton Wade on the practice squad, you're like, all right, cool, we can roll with that, and that's good. But if he doesn't, I think we might be looking back on that and saying, that might be a decision the Ravens might not love looking back in 5 years. But we don't know. We don't know who Dayton Wade is in a full regular season 5 years from now. I am seeing comments about Tez Walker in the chat, BP, Tanya as well here. Tez to me was a potential candidate for IR if they really wanted to play that card. But the thing with the receiver room now is the youth, because Nelson Aguilar is your only vet. You're confident in Zay Flowers, right? I'm confident in Zay Flowers. It's not a Zay Flowers question. But Rashod Bateman, Tez Walker, who I think a lot of people expected is like, oh, you know, this guy could come in, maybe be the 3 for them in best case scenario. Big body target, had a great mini camp, a great OTAs, and then just kind of disappeared. Didn't really do a bunch. And that's concerning, because then what if the Ravens, you know, Tim Patrick was out there, he's going to sign with Detroit's practice squad. There are others, you know, if we're talking about guys who are already on the free agent market, guys like Michael Thomas and Hunter Renfrow. But this receiving group is really going to have to be carried by their top 3. And I really do hope Tylan Wallace gets more opportunities this year. I don't think he's been given necessarily a fair shake in terms of his talent as a wide receiver. He's just kind of been, the receiver room, despite not being like good, has been clogged. In my opinion, it's why, you know, James Prochet, we can talk about him a bunch. He never really got a fair shot either, if being honest. And, you know, Prochet, he's in Cleveland now, that chapter is over. But it's guys like Prochet and Wallace, etc., guys that never really got a fair shake because it was, oh, well, they signed a vet to stop the gap for a season. That guy's going to play over you. So it's tough, but the wide receiver conversation is one that Baltimore's been looking to solve. You can go however far back you want to with that conversation. But for the Ravens, they did value special teams over offense here. I mean, that is the reality, right? We can kind of talk about different angles, different viewpoints, but the Ravens valued special teams and Deontay Hardy's return ability over the potential offensive juice that Dayton Wade could have maybe given you. And I wouldn't have expected Dayton Wade to be even just active on game day, maybe for special teams or something like that, steps in the event of an injury. But that's the other thing, where now Deontay Hardy is the last guy, in my opinion. Now Deontay Hardy's the last guy. That, to me, is where if you want to bring in a vet, it'd be Deontay Hardy who gets cut. Because I'm not cutting Town. I really want Town to get an opportunity. And I see BP here saying Tylan Wallace had 3 straight great preseasons, rarely gets regular season snaps. That needs to change. I agree. I think Tylan Wallace deserves more opportunities. But the wide receiver conversation, it's always going to be, we're going to look back on this season, and it's always going to be the Deontay Hardy versus Dayton Wade conversation. And depending on if Dayton Wade makes the practice squad, that could be a very loud conversation throughout the year. Offensive line, not necessarily any surprises outside of Josh Jones making the roster. I think that was just the vet that Baltimore had, and they wanted to keep 10 for the vet. I think it's a very easy trade-in, trade-out situation if you can go and put a Max Sharping on the roster, right? Max Sharping would be a really quality player, just as a vet guy, multiple positions. Josh Jones didn't show me much in the preseason. Josh Jones had one of the worst miscommunications of the preseason, but still made the roster. He's a guy I didn't have on my roster for a reason, and I don't think he did enough to make the roster, but the Ravens obviously felt differently, and that's okay, right? Obviously, we're not going to guess how the Ravens feel about certain guys. Obviously, what he did was not good. And I see Yolanda also talking about Saleh. Saleh didn't show me a lot either. I think to me, the thing with Saleh was they want to see the developmental traits, and they had a developmental spot, and that either was going to go to an undrafted rookie or to Saleh. now that we are past the cut downs and there are guys available, it could be a little bit of, oh, now this guy's available. Well, Salah, Josh Jones, see you later. We're gonna bring in this guy. So I would have been shocked if Baltimore kept any less than 9 offensive linemen. They keep 10, a little more than what I had going on, but we'll see, because I don't think this roster is complete, especially Jeff Rubeck, friend of the show, ended up reporting that the Ravens are expected, and he expects them to be aggressive and active when kind of filling out the back end of the roster here. A little surprised that they didn't do really handshake deals unless they plan on bringing back Daryl Worley. I feel like Daryl Worley is just going to be the practice squad elevation guy. You know, he'll probably easily make this practice squad, and it's whatever, like, is a vet, he's going to go there. But Chris Board and Brent Urban, I feel like you could have squeezed the Dayton Wade on the roster, could have squeezed the Joe Evans on the roster. Now you would have had to find space, you know, DUIR those guys, whatever you want to do with them. But the handshake deal, not what Baltimore did this season. I do not think they made any handshake deals. So that was a little surprising to me. Joe Evans not making the roster. So my prediction was Adisa Isaac was going to go on injured reserve designated to return. With him not going on there, I guess they feel good enough that he'll be able to come back within maybe even before week 1 starts. I don't know. Obviously, he got injured on his other leg, so he was out after that Falcons game. But yeah, it's going to be I don't know, because to me, I think that he is probably, between him and Tavius Robinson, you can rotate those guys in with their skill sets. They have different skill sets, but we don't really know what's going on with TJ Tampa right now. Is he fully going to be back? Right, Chris Board. That's a guy that I thought was going to be another handshake deal, as I mentioned. But the cuts, to me, that I'm kind of monitoring, especially as we move into practice squad territory. I had the roster. Let me bring up the cuts really quickly. Here we go. Guys who I'm expecting the Ravens to be interested in for the practice squad. Bub Cooper, I expect him to get claimed on waivers, but I think that he's going to be someone they want to have as one of their secondary members on the practice squad. Malik Cunningham, I think, is the guy they really like. Apparently, they're going to sign Keith Kirkwood to the practice squad. I would anticipate, if Joe Evans clears, they'd want him. Kadir Ismail is apparently someone they're interested in, and rightfully so. It's going to be interesting between Emory Jones and Devin Leary. I would personally put Emory Jones on the practice squad. Devin Leary did not show me anything. Emory Jones did. But going to be really, I think Deshaun Manning is someone who they'd like on the practice squad. Maybe, again, Darian Dalcour from Alabama, who played center for them. Let's see. Evandy Rigby, Josh Ross, obviously Dayton Wade. I think Pepe Williams goes somewhere else. I think either he gets claimed or it's just a different opportunity in general for him. Vets, I could see John Kelly, Anthony Miller, Daryl Worley. Let's see. Apparently, Josh Tupou and DeAndre Sinnett were both injury settlements, so I don't know how that is going to work out. Kadar Holman, I could see as another guy they'd want on the practice squad, and I also expect them to make a couple of other moves of just maybe 1, 2, 3 players that they could put on their practice squad from other teams. So we are going to see how that works out. But coming up in the final part of the show, going to be diving into some outside options for the Ravens who they could add to their 53-man roster: running back, wide receiver, offensive line, the whole 9 yards. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. We're back our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here on Tuesday night with you. Appreciate everybody for being here with me again and giving me some time on your Tuesday night. Hopefully it's a relaxing night for you. I know it's kind of stressful leading up to the Ravens roster because they literally didn't announce it for 4+ hours. By the way, I'm gonna say right now, teams should have a mandate in terms of when they have to get these out by, like 5:30, an hour and a half after 5:30. I know there was apparently some issue with like the waiver wire or something, and that's why we didn't see anything. But the picks are submitted by 4 p.m. Eastern. 5:30 to me, I think is valuable enough there, right? But that's just my little rant. Appreciate everybody again for being here. And we're going to be live again tomorrow, 6 a.m. Eastern time, breaking down some more outside options for the Ravens, targeting some players that they could potentially add in positions that they need to add at. Now, I also see, quickly here before I dive into it, Devin Leary, worst draft pick. I was not a fan of the pick. If you have been tuning in with me for a while here, if you watch my draft coverage on Locked On Ravens, I had said that the last draftable quarterback was Joe Milton. And then after that, you just sign an undrafted guy and you move on. When they picked Devin Leary, I wasn't a fan now. And that's kind of where we are with that. Let's talk about options. options for the Ravens that they could potentially sign or go out of their way to get. I think, to me, the guy that and we talked about this, right? Kind of talked about it in the first part of the show. Samaje Perine is someone that I would not mind is the third running back for a while before Keaton Mitchell comes back, because I think that gives you flexibility. He is the perfect third running back, practice squad running back. That to me is it. Rasheen Ali didn't show me. If Rasheen Ali had showed me something during the preseason, I would have said, all right, you can just roll with the rookie and Keaton will come back eventually, and that's that. Rasheen Ali didn't show me anything. He didn't show me anything. So I would put Samaje Perine on the roster over Rasheen Ali. I put Rasheen Ali on IR. I think wide receiver-wise, there are a couple of different options. We talked about the Michael Thomases of the world, the Hunter Renfrows of the world as well. There were a few other guys. I know a lot of people are interested in Noah Brown for the Ravens, who got cut by Houston. He's an intriguing option. Noah Brown. It'd be, again, if they sign a wide receiver, you're taking off Deontay Hardy. And if they didn't keep Dayton Wade over Deontay Hardy, I don't know if they're going to bring in another wide receiver like that. I think, honestly, if I'm assessing the situation off of what I feel like the Ravens are thinking right now, I think they're confident in their guys. I think they're going to completely lean into this youth movement. I think they're going to bring guys back like Anthony Miller, and that'll be your vet, Keith Kirkwood, who apparently they are going to bring back as well. And then I think that Malik Cunningham will be that third wide receiver, and they feel confident enough in Anthony Miller coming up for a game if somebody goes down. I would personally favor the Ravens bringing in a Michael Thomas or a Noah Brown, but I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to. I see Kieran mentioning Tyler Huntley here. Huntley, there were 4 quarterbacks that made this Browns roster. Now, I don't think that's the end result. They are looking to trade either Huntley or Jameis Winston, if I'm not mistaken. DTR did make the roster for them. Huntley as a practice squad quarterback would be fine. I know people aren't very fond of the idea, especially, looking through some of the social media, the live chats here, comments, whatever. I don't think people love Tyler Huntley. I think as a practice squad quarterback, he is 100% okay. I'm totally fine with Tyler Huntley. Now, it would have to be a trade. Again, are you giving up draft capital? Are you giving up a conditional 7th for Tyler Huntley, and either you keeping 3 quarterbacks on the roster, or are you going to just cut him and put him on the press? So I think someone claims him if you cut him. Actually, I don't know his veteran status. Let me take that back. I don't know his veteran status of whether he actually is subject to waivers or not. I would assume he is, but I'm not going to commit to that. But Huntley's a guy that I would absolutely take. I think they're just going to roll with either Leary or Emory Jones. I think they're going to pick one of those guys, and that'll be their practice squad quarterback. This Josh Johnson is the vet now. 2 quarterbacks, though, I think was the right move for the Ravens. 2 quarterbacks, I think, was the right move. I see Donovan Smith at right tackle. There are a bunch of tackle options. I mentioned Max Sharping, who got cut by Philadelphia, and he was he's played tackle, played guard. He might have center experience, if I'm not mistaken. Not exactly sure on that. But I think that either you get rid of Josh Jones and you bring in a more proven option, someone that showed more during the preseason, or you get rid of Saleh and bring in a vet to pair with Josh Jones and have more veteran options there. Because the battle that the Ravens are going to have to face, there is a clear battle that the Ravens are going to have to go through this season with their youth in terms of how much leeway and runway they give these players, how much of an experience in terms of learning, growing, going through mistakes, learning through those. This team is competing for a Super Bowl. And you cannot have this be a learning year. The Ravens are leading really into their youth, really into it. And that has the potential to be one of the biggest rewards the Ravens could have ever thought of. Or there's risk that is in there. So if we want to go offensive line, we're talking about the offensive line. They lose Kevin Zeitler. They lose Morgan Moses. They lose John Simpson. Those are your 3. You're bringing in I don't even know because the Ravens have made their decisions, but they haven't announced it yet. So I'm just going to assume. The Ravens start Andrew Voorhees, Daniel Faalele, and Roger Rosengarten. Just for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to say that is what they're going with. How long do you give Daniel Faalele if he struggles? How long if Roger Rosengarten goes through some rookie struggles in the run game? Do you rotate those guys? My prediction, and I said this on this morning's episode of Locked On Ravens, if you haven't checked that out, highly recommend it. We talked about the Ravens offensive line, some other decisions as well. But I said that I think at some point they're going to use a rotation. I think they're going to trim it down to one player in the rotation. One player. It's going to be someone rotating in for Stanley, someone rotating in for whoever starts at right tackle. I think it'll be McCary. But it's just, I don't think you can win a Super Bowl that way. It's tough. I don't think you can win a Super Bowl that way. And I'm not a fan of the rotating offensive line. I think you need your guys to be in there and healthy. The Ravens' offensive line hinges on a lot of things. Ronnie Stanley being healthy and playing the full season healthy is one of them. But I think you need to have him in there for all of your snaps. All of your snaps. So that's where I am with the offensive line. So I think Max Sharping could be a pretty solid option. Again, I mentioned guys like Bam Knight, who was cut from Detroit. Tim Patrick was an option, but he is going to sign with Detroit's practice squad, as I mentioned earlier in the show. So I think that there are one or two guys that they could either look at I don't know if it's going to be a waiver claim for them. I think it'll be more so a veteran option. I don't think that they need necessarily to go out there and claim a young guy. I think that if they were going to add to the roster, it would be more of they're trading for a vet or they're signing a guy that there's some level of a deal with. But these are the next couple of days because we're not done with this. We're not done with the Ravens roster. This is the initial 53, right? We analyze, we go through it, we break it down. But over the next couple of days, as the Ravens get closer and closer to their game with the Chiefs, they're probably going to have to add somebody. I would assume at running back, maybe an offensive lineman to replace Salah or Josh Jones. Maybe they do nothing. But I would probably say that overall the Ravens they're probably good for one or two moves. So that's where I am with that. And we're going to have more names, of course, coming up tomorrow for you on the show. So again, be sure to stay tuned for that as we'll be going 6 a.m. regular episode. We're going to have a lot for you on that episode, including running back, wide receiver, offensive line, more into that conversation, because I think it is really intriguing about how, look, you get your initial roster and then finally you round it out. But overall, I think Baltimore did okay. I think there were definitely some moves that I would have made, definitely some others I would not have. But that's every roster cut down day, right? Super happy for Bo Braid. Wish Dayton Wade had made the roster. But unfortunately, that is not how the cookie crumbled here. And then other than that, just figuring out the rest of it, how it goes. Because over the next, I believe waivers is either tomorrow or Thursday. I don't know if there's a full day between waivers this year or not. I'm not exactly sure, so apologies on that. Well, whenever the waivers come out, that'll be when the practice squad starts to get formed, and we'll be going live if there are any moves, if the Ravens end up losing any guys to waivers. That will be exactly what we talk about. Oh, also, thank you. I forgot about this, Co-Air. Matt Braid is another option for the Ravens. Got cut by the 49ers. That could be it. And BP talking about Falele here. Yes, in the preseason, the common misconception was Daniel Falele was just bad across the board. Terrible. But he was actually decent in pass blocking. I thought that all the Ravens offensive linemen were better in the pass blocking aspect of things. It was just the run blocking. Falele struggled getting out into space, getting to his guy in time on pulls. In this offense, you have to be able to work in space and move. And Falele can't do that very well right now for what the Ravens actually need him to do. I think that, and we talked about this on this morning's episode, the actual floor of Ben Cleveland compared to the ceiling of Falele, I'm taking the floor in the slightly lesser ceiling of Ben Cleveland over the ceiling of Daniel Falele with the pretty much rock bottom floor that Daniel Falele has to offer. And then same thing, we can have the conversation with the tackle spot too, where I think Rosengarten has a much better spot, or at least a shot at starting on that offensive line, as opposed to a Daniel Falele Ben Cleveland competition. But for McCary, apparently the issue or what's going on is the durability. Is the durability for Patrick McCary over a full 17 games going to be enough? Is he going to be able to stay healthy? Because if not, you're rolling with the rookie, and that's exactly what you have. So there are other interesting conversations. I think we're all in agreement. Andrew Voorhees is pretty much locked up that starting starting guard job. There's no debate on that. But for now, the Ravens do have a lot of other things to keep in mind and monitor, and we're going to see how it all plays out. That's all I have for you today on this episode of Locked On Ravens Live Edition. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in today. Of course, we'll be back here tomorrow, 6 a.m., diving more into the Ravens roster, breaking it down, analyzing it, and also a big conversation on who else they could bring in. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Hit that like button, subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form. It's the same show, both audio and video. So really appreciate all the support. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.